Welcome to Tech Talk Tuesday, brought to you by Idaho Public Television and Montana PBS.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tech Talk Tuesday. And this is week 4 of talking about coding. I'm a little bit sad. I could talk about coding for like weeks and months on end, but I'm excited to be able to share with you. We are excited. I'm here with my PBS friend from Montana PBS, Nikki Vredenberg as well. And I'm Carrie from Idaho Public Television. So today we're going to talk about coding in the content area. So here's the thing that I always tell teachers is coding for coding's sake is wonderful. But then if you really want to take it to that next level, inserting it into a content area just makes it so much better. And I know that as a teacher, sometimes we have to justify what we're teaching to our principals, right? And so if we can say, well, I'm fitting this into reading or math, sometimes it's easier for us to justify being able to fit coding in. So Nikki and I wanted to share with you a couple of like how it aligns with state standards and things like that. And then we'll share some examples either that we did as ourselves as classroom teachers or that we know of the teachers have used as we've been out working with them. So I'm going to hand it off to Nikki, who's going to talk for just a minute about some of the standards that we can meet.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few, and this is just a start. But yeah, if you're making the case for coding, you can meet standards in English language arts, math, as well as the ISTE technology standards. And I think I mentioned before, here in Montana, we have computer science standards now that are part of the state standards that teachers are responsible for. So this is kind of some examples of where we've seen it fit in. Speaking and listening, informational text, writing, using digital resources for writing, geometry, measurement, empowered learner, digital citizenship. So all of these allow you to meet the standards while you're doing coding. And this is also a nice graphic for thinking about where it fits into your science standards. The next generation science standards were adopted almost in their entirety here in Montana. They did some revisions, but the state science standards look very similar to the NGSS standards. And so if you're meeting those, especially those science practices, those fit in really nicely with computer science standards, especially when we look at analyzing data and building models and running simulations. That's where coding fits into those. Did you want to add to that, Carrie?
I was just going to say, in Idaho, we do not have next generation science standards, but there are computer science standards and there are technology standards for teachers, which coding aligns with. And it does still align with many state standards in science for Idaho. So just wanted to point out that this one is about next gen, and in Idaho, we don't have that, but it does align with Idaho science. Some science standards as well. There are analyzing data, there are models and simulation standards for science in Idaho as well. So
yeah. So we've talked a little bit. So when you think about, I think if you've been watching this series, you've heard us talk about Hour of Code, and there is that week in December devoted to Hour of Code. But gosh, you can have the Hour of Code anytime you want. You don't need to do it in December. But really, it's just the idea of challenging your class to start this new thing and to do it for at least an hour. And it doesn't have to be a continuous hour. It could be 20 minutes spread across 3 days, just taking some time to practice coding for a set period of time. And so that's how we started it in my class. Was we tried to meet the Hour of Code challenge as a class by using Codable every day for a week. And that got us all hooked and got us really excited. And from there, coding became a learning center. I had iPads in my classroom, and I could set up the iPads at a table and have kids go over and do whatever coding program we had learned. For us, it was Codable. I've talked about that before, but we've also talked about the Osmo games, and those could be learning centers as well. So when I was teaching K1, learning centers were how we taught math and reading, and that's how I met with small groups. So if kids weren't meeting with me, they might move through different centers. And after we had done some whole group coding lessons, so that I felt really confident that they knew what to do and they were at that independent place with our coding activities, then they could use them at a learning center, and you spend from 10 to 15 minutes working through their coding programs. Some coding programs allow them to save their progress so that they can pick up where they left off. And so that would mean having some kind of a login credential set up with them. Others, especially with Osmo, a lot of times it didn't really matter. They just pop in there and code and play the games or whatever, and just keep moving through. The other place it fit in to our day was Genius Hour or Passion Projects. And I did this in K1 and then again when I had 4th and 5th grade. And that was just kids, I gave the kids the time to explore things that were of interest to them. And coding was something that was often chosen. And that was where if kids had gone beyond Codable or had gone beyond some of our Osmo coding games, they might explore code.org or Khan Academy to try some things that were a little bit more challenging, especially for those kids that were really, really into coding. Carrie, where did coding fit in your classroom when you were working with students?
Yeah, I taught 5th graders. I loved that your number one there was to code first. And I think that that's seems maybe like a no-brainer, but really get your kids familiar with coding before you try to put it into a content area. Otherwise, the frustration level can be too high because they're trying to meet the content level goal, but they don't know how to code. So giving them some time to play and explore. So we often did Hour of Code as well. I used Khan Academy quite often. Again, this was back in the day. It was several years ago, and so there weren't a million resources for coding, especially at a 5th grade level. And so I mainly used some of the activities on Khan Academy. We often did the same thing where we did the Hour of Code. As a way to introduce it. And then there were several areas that it was used in my classroom, but probably one of my favorites, especially some of them have coordinate grids. And that was a pretty big standard in 5th grade when I was teaching. And so that was a really great way to introduce and let kids practice working on the coordinate grid, because they could, code it and have the kid or the character or whatever it is move to the place on the grid. And so that was one place in my classroom that I used coding during math time to let them kind of manipulate a coordinate grid a little bit. But I think I'll share some examples. I can share a couple of examples also of teachers that I as I've been out and about and working in this capacity now of training teachers, I've done a lot of coding workshops, and so talked to a lot of teachers and been given some really great examples of how teachers are using coding in the content areas. In reading and ELA, probably one of my favorites. Well, there's a lot of really great ones, but I had a teacher tell me that she uses it to allow her kids to illustrate the chapter or even illustrate their own writing. We often have kids do that on paper or whatever, but she allowed them to do that using the app that I had trained them on, Scratch Junior, and then letting the kids, because there's the ability to draw their own characters or take pictures of characters. And so if they were using a book like a Basil Reader or whatever it is, they could take a picture of the characters. So that's one example. I had another teacher tell me that she used it to teach the predicting skill to her kids, and so she would read part of a story and then let them code how they thought it ended and share that with each other, which I thought was such a fun idea. And then they would read the rest of the story and talk about their predictions and things like that. So I thought that was a pretty cool use of it. Nikki, do you have any other ELA reading?
Yeah, I've been in classrooms, especially with the PBS Kids Scratch Junior app. Kids were figured out quickly that they could create multiple scenes and they could move through those scenes. And so I had one little girl come up with the story, and she kind of had a beginning, middle, and end to her story. And it was in the first scene, the girl going into a house. So she coded the character going into the house, and then it went to the next scene and the girl was in the house. And so then she had things for what was happening in that. And so it was really cool to think about the sequence of a story and have them code the things that happened in the story. And some of those things happened even without the assignment. Like that wasn't even the assignment. And she just kind of developed this idea
I love
for
that.
herself. Yeah.
That's cool.
But
I love, and I think I talked a little bit about math, but I loved it for grids. I loved it for sequencing, for math as well. Even just general counting, because the littles, you know, in Scratch Junior can count the steps that they want the character to go to get over to the other character. And so even just for, you know, to count things. And then for higher level, like I said, grids and things like that. Did you have other math ideas?
Well, for us in math, like I said, it was a learning center. And so, yeah, it was it was directions, learning the cardinal directions and right, left, up, down, and understanding those kinds of things. And then the sequence, what comes next, what comes after that, and the computational thinking and perseverance. And for us, it was so much conversation about practice, not quitting. And that was really the language that we use, was this is going to get frustrating and you're going to run your code and it's not going to work the way you want it to. And so right now we need to really practice not quitting. We're going to keep moving through this, and we're going to try different ways. We're going to work together to explore different problems. And so I really saw coding as hitting those soft skills that, you know, you have to click on those things in a report card. And sometimes you don't always have evidence to back up your gut feelings for why a kid can persevere through tasks without help, or, you know, things like that. And coding provided a lot of that evidence for us, and allowed us to bring that language into other things too, because there were a lot of places with reading and writing that we had to practice not quitting as well. And so we could talk about the coding lesson and how that was carried over into other things.
I love that. Yeah, I found it as a great tool for the problem solving thing as well. So probably one of my favorite examples that I've heard of for science was from a 4th grade teacher who I did a training with and taught her how to use Scratch Junior. And then she emailed me later that year and said that normally her kids learn about biomes, and, you know, she always did the traditional, like, build a biome in a shoebox. And she, in her email, indicated that, you know, she had been for a couple of years trying to figure out something else to do, because the reality is she knew that 90% of the work was the parents, right? Because the kids took it home, and mom and dad did 90% of the work, and the kids didn't really seem to, there didn't seem to be a lot of really quality learning happening by having the kids do that. And so she had the genius idea, after spending time in this course that I taught in the professional development, and then spending time with it throughout the year. And she used Scratch Junior to have her kids create virtual biomes that year, because the Scratch Junior, the PBS Kids Scratch Junior there's what could be, it looks like a Arctic tundra, there's a forest, there's an ocean, there's a desert. And so the kids were given their biome, and they had to research. They had to put animals into their biome that fit appropriately, which also are characters within Scratch Junior. And then, you know, they had to do some research on why those animals fit in that biome. And anyway, they created a virtual biome using Scratch Junior. They had to add in their voice and explain about each of the animals and why they were there, and talk a little bit about their biome. But they did all of it in class, and they did it obviously electronically. And she sent me an email telling me that she was blown away by how much more the kids learned that year. And, you know, when it came time for the unit tests at the end of the unit on biomes, that they blew her out of the water, because they actually learned the stuff, even the ones they weren't assigned, because she allowed them to, like, look at each other's and listen to the presentation, the words. And so I loved that. And I thought, oh my gosh, I never thought to do that. But what a creative way to do that. And so she said, I'm never going back to shoe boxes again. And and I was like, yes, not that shoe boxes are bad, but we can save the environment also, right? And she was just really excited about how much more engaged the kids were. And so that's probably always been one of my favorite examples of how to use it to kind of take things to the next level. So they're already creating biomes, give them the time to do it digitally instead, and do the research and things like that. So I love that one for science.
That's great. Is that everything we had?
I mean, I could tell stories all day about it, but I think that ultimately, I think kids tend to be more engaged when they can code it themselves. And so, like, you know, with the biome story, they just were more engaged. So I hope that, now these are just examples. I think you could probably Google and find a million others. And like I said, I probably have 10 more stories, but there are ways, if you're thinking about it, to really incorporate coding or coding like activities into content areas, and to kind of take that to the next level.
So, well, that's great. So hopefully you got some neat ideas for using coding, and that you're getting everything going, and you see how easily it integrates into multiple content areas. This has been Tech Talk Tuesday, all about coding, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.